The screams echoed through the village of Agogoshi. It was a sunny day, but something terrible had happened. A hunter named Akwasi Amankwa had gone to the king's palace to share his hunt. He always brought the king the best of his game, but today was different. When he opened his sack, a severed human head rolled out. The king and his people were shocked. Their faces turned pale, and some even fainted. The head was bloody and gruesome. Amankwa was just as horrified. He had no idea how the head had ended up in his sack. He tried to speak, but his voice was drowned out by the screams and cries of the villagers. "Amankwa, you have brought evil upon us," the king shouted, pointing an accusing finger at him. "You are responsible for the murders that have been happening in our village." Amankwa's heart pounded. "No, my king, I am innocent. I don't know how this head got here," he pleaded, but no one listened. The villagers whispered and murmured, their eyes filled with fear and suspicion. They believed Amankwah was the killer terrorizing their peaceful village. The king's face was stern. "Tomorrow we will gather under the ancient oak tree," he declared. "And you, Amankwah, will be executed for your crimes." The king's guards grabbed Amankwah. "You are the murderer," they accused. Amankwa shook his head. No. I don't know how this head got in my sack," he cried, but his pleas were ignored. The king, looking very angry, said, "You will be executed for these crimes." Amankwa was taken to a dark cell. His world was shattered. He sat on the cold floor, thinking about his children who depended on him. How would they survive without him? He was innocent, but no one believed him. He remembered the days when he helped the villagers with his herbal medicines and hunted to provide food. Now, everyone thought he was a killer. The king's word was final. The night seemed endless, and Amankwa barely slept. When the first light of dawn appeared, he knew his time was up. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, and prayed for a miracle. But deep down, he knew that the next day would bring his end. The village was quiet, but fear hung in the air. Everyone was afraid of what would happen next. Akwasi Amankwa was known as a kind man. He wasn't just a great hunter. He was also a skilled farmer and herbalist. He had a big heart and always helped the villagers when they were sick. His special herbal remedies worked like magic, and everyone loved him for his kindness. Amankwa lived with his 2 daughters. He loved them very much and took care of them since their mother had died long ago. Life was hard without his wife, but Amankwa did his best to provide for his family. He was always busy, either hunting in the forest, farming his land, or making herbal medicines. Every day, Amankwa would head into the forest with his bow and arrows. He knew the forest like the back of his hand and was always careful to hunt only what was needed. After a successful hunt, he would bring his best game to the king as a gift. The king appreciated Amankwa's generosity and often invited him to the palace for a meal. One sunny morning, as Amankwa prepared for his daily hunt, his friend Kojo came by his hut. Kojo was a tall man with a cheerful face, always eager to chat and share news. "Good morning, Amankwa," Kojo called out. "I see you're off to the forest again. Any special plans today?" Amankwa smiled and adjusted his hunting gear. "Good morning, Kojo. Just the usual. I hope to bring back some good game for the king. He's been very kind to me, and I like to show my appreciation." Kojo nodded. "You're always so thoughtful. I'm sure the king will be pleased." As Amankwa walked towards the forest, he passed by many villagers who greeted him warmly. They knew that Amankwa wasn't just a hunter. He was also a healer. He had a secret talent for using herbs to treat various ailments, a skill he had gained from a mystical encounter in the forest many years ago. One day, while Amankwa was deep in the forest, he came across a strange, shimmering creature caught in a hunter's trap. The creature, with glistening scales and bright eyes, looked up at Amankwa with a mix of fear and desperation. "Please," the creature begged, "help me. I promise I will repay you." Moved by the creature's plea, Amankwa carefully freed it from the trap. "Why were you caught in this trap?" he asked gently. "I was searching for herbs to heal my kind," the creature explained. "But now I am in your debt. I will give you a gift that will help you heal others." The creature handed Amankwa a small, glowing object. "This will cure any illness," it said. "But you must promise never to harm any of my kind." Amankwa promised, and from that day, He used the magical object to help the villagers. Whenever someone fell ill, Amankwa would use the herbs and the magical gift to cure them. The villagers were amazed by his ability and grateful for his help. Amankwa and Kojo became close friends, sharing stories and adventures. Kojo was the only one who knew about the magical object and the promise Amankwa had made. They kept this secret between them, understanding how precious and powerful it was. Amankwa continued to live a life of kindness and service, always putting others before himself. His reputation grew, and soon everyone in Agogoshi knew him not just as a hunter, but as a true friend and healer. The villagers felt safe and cared for, knowing that Amankwa was always there to help them with his skills and the magic he carried. But one day, something happened. The king's palace was suddenly filled with worry. Princess Asabia, the king's beloved daughter, had become gravely ill. She lay in her bed, pale and weak, while the royal doctors tried everything they could to make her better, but nothing seemed to work. The king, a strong and wise ruler, paced the palace halls with a worried frown. He loved his daughter dearly and could not bear to see her suffering. The royal advisors and healers whispered among themselves, unsure of what to do. The king's face grew more troubled with each passing day. One evening, as the sun was about to set, the king gathered the villagers and announced his desperate plea. "My daughter, Princess Asabia, is very sick," he said, his voice trembling. "No medicine or treatment seems to help her. I am offering a great reward to anyone who can cure her." The crowd fell silent, their eyes fixed on the king. Murmurs of surprise and curiosity spread through the gathered villagers. The king continued, "Whoever can heal my daughter will not only receive a reward, but will also have the honor of marrying her." The promise of such a grand reward stirred excitement and hope among the villagers. Many people began to think of ways they could help, hoping to win both the king's favor and the princess's hand in marriage. But amidst the excitement, another shadow loomed over the village. On the outskirts of Agogoshi, a series of mysterious murders had begun to occur. Villagers whispered about the brutal killings, and fear spread quickly. No one knew who was behind these crimes, but everyone was afraid. The king, already distraught over his daughter's illness, was now also troubled by the growing fear and unrest in the village. "I will not rest until my daughter is well," the king declared. "And I will not rest until the murderer is found and brought to justice. Anyone found guilty of these crimes will face severe punishment." The village was in turmoil. People were frightened by the murders and desperate to find a way to save Princess Asabia. The king's promise of marriage to anyone who could cure his daughter became a beacon of hope amidst the fear. As days passed, the princess's condition worsened. The palace was filled with despair, and the villagers felt the weight of the king's words pressing down on them. Hope was in short supply, but the promise of a cure and a reward kept many searching for answers, unaware that dark and troubling events were unfolding that would soon change everything. Early one morning, Kojo knocked on Amankwa's door. The sun was just rising, casting a shiny light over the village of Agogoshi. Amankwa opened the door and smiled at his friend. "Good morning, Kojo," Amankwa greeted. "Komein, Komein." Kojo stepped inside and sat down. "Amankwa, I have heard about Asabia's sickness. How is she doing?" he asked with concern. Amankwa sighed. "It has become serious, Kojo. None of the healers have been able to help her. I think it's time I use the magical object to try and heal her." Kojo nodded. "I agree, my friend. You have helped so many with your herbs. If the stone can save her, then you must use it. The king's daughter's life is at stake." Amankwa looked at Kojo and saw the determination in his eyes. "You are right, Kojo. I will go to the palace and offer my help. I hope it works." Kojo put a hand on Amankwa's shoulder. "I believe in you, Amankwa. You are a good man, and you will do the right thing." Before Kojo left his friend's house, Amankwa assured him he would go forward before the next market day. 2 days later, Amankwa went hunting in the forest. He caught some game and decided to visit Kojo's farm to share his catch. As he arrived at the farm, he noticed that Kojo was not there. "I'll just wait for him," Amankwa thought. He set down his sack by a footpath and decided to relieve himself nearby. The forest was quiet, and he could hear the birds singing in the trees. It was peaceful, and for a moment, Amankwa felt at ease. While Amankwa was away, a passerby walked down the footpath. This person was carrying a severed human head, terrified of being caught with it. The passerby saw Amankwa's unattended sack and quickly hid the head inside, hoping to avoid suspicion. They then fled, leaving the head hidden in the sack. Unaware of what had happened, Amankwa returned and picked up his sack. He decided to go straight to the king's palace to share his catch, as was his custom. He walked through the village, greeting people along the way, feeling proud of his successful hunt. When he arrived at the palace, several royals were gathered to check on the ailing Asabia. The king was there too, looking worried and tired. Amankwa greeted the king and others present with a bow. "My king, I have brought some game for you," Amankwa said, opening his sack to reveal his gifts. But instead of the fresh game, the severed head tumbled out of the sack. The sight was horrifying. The royals gasped, and the king's eyes widened in shock. "What is this?" the king demanded, his voice trembling with anger and fear. Amankwa stared at the head, his own heart pounding with horror. I don't know how this got here," he stammered. "I swear, my king, I did not do this." But no one believed him. The king ordered his immediate arrest, and Amankwa was thrown into a dark cell, awaiting his execution the next day. The town crier, always ready with the latest news, was called to announce the shocking discovery. He stood before the gathered villagers and cried out, "A severed head has been found in the hunter Amankwa's sack. A meeting will be held tomorrow under the ancient oak tree to discuss this grave matter." The villagers were stunned. Whispers of disbelief and fear spread like wildfire. The accusation against Amankwa seemed too horrible to ignore. His reputation as a kind and skilled hunter was overshadowed by the grim discovery. Amankwa, now a prisoner of suspicion, was left to face the dire consequences. He looked around, hoping for someone to believe his innocence, but the growing fear and anger among the villagers made it clear that his troubles were far from over. They accused Amankwa of the murders that had been plaguing Agogoshi. Amankwa sat in his cell, his mind racing. He knew he was innocent, but he couldn't explain how the head had ended up in his sack. He thought about his daughters and how they would survive without him. He prayed for a miracle, but the future seemed dark and uncertain. The next day, the villagers gathered under the ancient oak tree, as the town crier had announced. The mood was somber and tense. The news of the severed head in Amankwa's sack had spread, and everyone was eager to know what would happen next. At the center of the gathering stood Amankwa, his hands bound and his face lined with worry. He looked around at the faces of the villagers who had once admired him. Now, those same faces were filled with anger and suspicion. The king, seated on a raised platform, looked grave. "The evidence against Amankwa is overwhelming," he declared. "A severed head was found in his sack. This is a serious crime, and the punishment must be severe." Amankwa's pleas echoed through the gathering. "Please, your majesty, I did not know the head was in my sack. Someone must have put it there. I am innocent." The king's advisor, a stern man named Nana Kofi, stepped forward. "The villagers are scared. The murders have made everyone nervous. The evidence against Amankwa is too strong to ignore." A murmur ran through the crowd. "But is there no way to prove his innocence?" someone asked. "He has always been kind and helpful." The king raised his hand to silence the crowd. "The decision has been made. Amankwa will be executed." The announcement hit like a thunderclap. Amankwa's two daughters, who were standing nearby, began to cry. They clutched each other, their faces wet with tears. "Father! Father!" they shouted, but their cries were lost in the noise of the gathering. As Amankwa was led away to the execution site, he turned to face the crowd one last time. His voice was filled with sorrow and anger. "May you all suffer as I have suffered. May you all face the pain and injustice that I have faced." The crowd fell silent, the air heavy with sadness. Amankwa was placed on the execution block, and the executioner readied his sword. The villagers watched in silence, many of them weeping openly. The scene was heartbreaking, with the once celebrated hunter now facing a tragic end. After the execution, the king made another announcement. As part of the punishment, Amankwa's daughters are to be banished from Agogoshi. They will no longer be welcome here. The two girls, still sobbing, were forced to leave their home. They gathered their few belongings and walked away from the village, their future uncertain. The villagers watched with heavy hearts, knowing that the punishment had not only taken Amankwa's life, but had also left his innocent daughters without a home. The village of Agogoshi was left in a state of deep sadness. The once peaceful place was now filled with sorrow and fear. Amankwa's tragic end and the banishment of his daughters cast a long shadow over the village, and many wondered how such a cruel fate could have befallen such a kind man. Agogoshi was known for its harsh punishments. When someone was found guilty of a serious crime, the village didn't just carry out the punishment. They also demolished the person's home and took all their belongings. Everyone knew that when Amankwa was executed, his house and possessions would be destroyed. Kojo knew this would happen. He had been friends with Amankwa for years and understood the risks. After the execution, he went straight to Amankwa's house. The house was empty, and the villagers were busy preparing to demolish it. Kojo quickly and quietly went inside. He searched through the house, finding Amankwa's magical object hidden in a corner. He also gathered other valuables, including some precious herbs and personal items. Kojo moved swiftly, making sure no one saw him. He knew he had to act fast before the demolition began. With the magical object and valuables safely hidden, Kojo left the house and went to a secret place in the forest where he could store them safely. He was determined to use the magical object to help the kingdom, and he had a plan to do just that. A few days later, Kojo went to the king. The king was still worried about his daughter, Asabiya, who had been seriously sick and couldn't wake up. The king's desperation was clear. He would do anything to ensure his daughter's complete recovery. Kojo approached the king and bowed deeply. "My king," he said, "I believe I can heal Princess Asabiya. I have a special remedy that could help her fully recover." The king's eyes lit up with hope. "If you can truly heal my daughter, I will reward you greatly. Please show me what you have." Kojo nodded and followed the king to Asabiya's room. He took out the magical object and his special herbs. The room was filled with the faint scent of herbs, and the king watched with great interest. Kojo began to prepare the remedy. He mixed the herbs with great care and placed the magical object on a table beside Asabiya's bed. He spoke softly, explaining to the king that the object had powerful healing properties. For the next 7 days, Kojo stayed with Asabiya, giving her the herbal remedy and using the magical object as instructed. He was careful and precise, following the methods he had learned from Amankwa. Slowly but surely, Asabiya's health improved. Her color returned, and she began to regain her strength. The king was amazed and grateful. He saw his daughter getting better each day, and his hope grew stronger. By the end of the week, Asabiya was able to walk again. She smiled and thanked Kojo for his help. The king, overjoyed with her recovery, honored his promise. Kojo was given a grand reward, and he was celebrated as a hero. The news of Asabiya's full recovery spread through the village, and people were relieved and happy. The king announced that Kojo had saved his daughter, and that the magical object had played a crucial role in her healing. While the village celebrated, Kojo kept the truth of the magical object and its origins a secret. He knew that the real story of how it came to be in his hands was a dark one, tied to the innocent man who had been wrongfully executed. Life in Agogoshi returned to a sense of normalcy, but the memory of Amankwa's curse and the events that followed continued to linger in the minds of the villagers. The tale of Kojo's heroism was celebrated, but it was overshadowed by the dark past that had led to his success. The king had kept his promise. With Princess Asabiya's health fully restored, the king was determined to honor the deal he had made. He announced that Asabiya would marry Kojo, the man who had healed her. The preparations for the wedding began immediately. The entire village was abuzz with excitement. Banners and decorations were put up everywhere, and the streets were filled with the aroma of delicious food being prepared. The villagers worked tirelessly to make the event grand and memorable. On the day of the wedding, the palace was transformed into a vibrant celebration. The hall was decorated with beautiful fabrics, colorful flowers, and shimmering lights. Musicians played joyful tunes, and dancers performed in traditional costumes. The whole village, and even people from nearby towns, gathered to witness the grand event. Kojo, dressed in fine clothes, looked nervous but happy. Asabiah, in a stunning wedding gown, was radiant. She had recovered from her illness and was now ready to start a new chapter in her life. The ceremony was filled with joy and laughter as the couple exchanged vows. The king smiled proudly, knowing that his daughter was happy and safe. The wedding feast was a highlight of the celebration. Tables were laden with delicious dishes, and everyone enjoyed the food and drinks. There was plenty of dancing and singing, and the whole village joined in the festivities. The atmosphere was filled with happiness, and it seemed like life in Agogoshi was returning to normal. For Kojo and Asabiah, it was a new beginning. They were surrounded by friends and family, and their happiness was evident. The king gave a heartfelt speech, thanking Kojo for saving his daughter and wishing the newlyweds a long and joyful life together. Despite the joy of the wedding, there was an undercurrent of unease. The villagers couldn't completely shake off the dark memories of the past, the wrongful execution of Amankwa and the curse he had placed on them. Some whispered about the curse and wondered if it would ever come to pass. But for now, the village celebrated. The grand marriage ceremony was a temporary escape from the shadows that loomed over Agogoshi. People danced, laughed, and enjoyed the feast, putting their worries aside for a moment. As the sun set and the stars appeared in the sky, the festivities continued late into the night. The celebration was a beautiful and joyful occasion, a stark contrast to the dark days that had preceded it. For one day, Agogoshi was filled with happiness and hope for the future. One bright and sunny afternoon, life in Agogoshi seemed perfect. Children played joyfully in the fields, and women sang happily as they prepared meals. Suddenly, the sky darkened. The sun vanished behind thick black clouds that appeared out of nowhere. "What's happening?" asked one of the children, pointing to the sky. Everyone looked up. It wasn't clouds or birds. It was snakes. Snakes were falling from the sky. Panic spread quickly. Children screamed and ran to their mothers. Women dropped their cooking pots and shouted for their families. Men grabbed sticks and tried to hit the snakes away. The snakes hissed and wriggled everywhere, making the ground look alive. "Run! Get inside!" shouted one of the villagers, trying to guide people to safety. The village was in chaos. People were running, crying, and shouting. The air was filled with fear and confusion. Nana Kwame, the village chief, tried to calm everyone down, but his voice was drowned out by the noise. "Everyone stay calm," he yelled, but no one could hear him over the screams. The poisonous snakes bit many villagers, and some fell to the ground in pain. The once happy village now looked like a nightmare. People trampled over each other in their haste to escape, adding to the confusion and terror. In the midst of this chaos, something even more terrifying happened. At the market, a massive snake coiled around Kojo's neck. The villagers watched in horror as the snake tightened its grip. Then, with a flash, the snake transformed into a beast. The sight was so shocking that some villagers fainted on the spot. Kojo, now surrounded by a terrified crowd, began to shout. "I confess," he cried. "I framed Amankwa to get the magical object. I put the severed head in his sack. It was all my doing." The villagers were stunned. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. The man they had trusted had betrayed them all. As Kojo finished his confession, his body changed even more. He grew taller and more monstrous until he was no longer recognizable. The beast that Kojo had become roared loudly, causing the ground to shake. The villagers screamed in terror, not knowing what to do. The beast looked at them with glowing red eyes, full of anger and malice. Then, with a powerful leap, it fled into the forest, leaving the villagers in a state of shock. "Did you hear what he said?" whispered one villager to another. "He framed Amankwa. We killed an innocent man," another villager cried, tears streaming down her face. The realization hit the villagers hard. They had been tricked into executing Amankwa, and now they were paying the price. The curse he had placed on them was coming true. The snakes kept falling from the sky, and the village remained in chaos. Nana Kwame, seeing the devastation, knew they needed to act fast. "We must find a way to stop this," he shouted. "We need help." The villagers gathered, desperate for a solution. They decided to seek the wise old woman in the forest, hoping she could help them undo the curse and bring peace back to Agogoshi. As they set out on their journey, the villagers knew their lives would never be the same. The horror of that afternoon would stay with them forever, a reminder of the terrible consequences of betrayal and injustice. The journey to find the wise woman was long and hard. The villagers walked for hours through the thick forest. The trees were tall and dense, their branches creating a canopy that blocked out the sun. The air was damp, and the ground was covered in leaves and moss. They had to be very careful, as snakes slithered around their feet. The forest was quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. After many hours, they finally reached the wise woman's hut. It was an ancient small house made of mud and straw. It looked very old, almost as if it had been there forever. The door was made of thick wood, and there were strange symbols carved into it. The wise woman came out to greet them. She was very old, with long white hair and a wrinkled face. Her eyes were bright and seemed to see everything. She wore a long, flowing robe and walked with a wooden staff. The villagers told her everything that had happened. They spoke of the snakes falling from the sky, the chaos in the village, and Kojo's terrible confession. The wise woman listened carefully, nodding her head slowly. "The serpents are angry for shedding innocent blood," she said. "You killed Amankwah, the kind hunter, for no reason. His blood now calls for vengeance. This is the abomination you have committed." The villagers were silent, feeling the weight of their mistake. They had to make things right. "You must send brave men to the Nima forest," the wise woman continued. "There, by the Ojiji River bank, you will find a sacred pot. You must bring it back for purification and sacrifices. Only then will the serpents be appeased, and peace will return to Agogoshi." The next day, the king chose 7 brave men to go into the Nima forest. The journey was long and dangerous. They had to cross rivers, climb steep hills, and avoid many wild animals. But they were determined to save their village. After many days, they finally reached the Ojiji River. The river was wide and flowed gently, its waters sparkling in the sunlight. By the bank, they found the sacred pot, just as the wise woman had said. They performed the rituals and made sacrifices, asking for forgiveness and peace. When they returned to Agogoshi with the pot, they placed it in the center of the village. The wise woman came and performed a final ceremony. She chanted ancient words, and the villagers watched in awe as the air around them seemed to shimmer. Slowly, the sky cleared, and the snakes stopped falling. The villagers felt a great weight lift from their hearts. They had been forgiven. However, it took 2 long years for absolute peace to return to Agogoshi. During this time, the villagers worked hard to make amends, and the story of Amankwah's innocence was passed down as a lesson to future generations. From then on, nobody wanted to remember the dark times. The brave men who had gone to the forest shivered whenever the story was told, and the village of Agogoshi never forgot the price of their mistake. Peace had returned, but the memory of that fateful afternoon served as a reminder to always seek the truth and act justly.